Hello, everyone. This is Monica Perez back with our friend Jason Purcell, who is going to give us a little financial update and hit some other interesting topics. I think we're going to talk about India, China, CBDC, and I'm sure much more. So thanks so much for being here, Jason.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be back.
I'm afraid this is during your work day, but I'm getting buttoned up to go to Jazz Fest on Wednesday. So I needed
Oh,
to,
sweet.
yeah, I can't. Normally, you come to us after work. I'm sure you took a little extra time. So thank you. And I want people to know that they can ask in the comments section. If you want to chat, that's great. If you want to ask Jason a question, put a little asterisk at the beginning. And then maybe halfway through, or even during the way, we'll ask Jason anything. So, okay.
And
So
I'll
we've
do
got,
my best to give an educated answer. I'm kind of like a deer in the headlights with questions I haven't seen before, but I'll do what I
well,
can.
that's fair. I mean, you don't talk out your butt, which is great. So so what's your first topic? Let's hit that.
Okay. Let's do what's going on with the India growth narrative. I just saw I'll try to pull it up kind of while we're talking here, but I just saw yet another Economist headline about that. This is after I've seen stuff. We're talking probably the last 3 or 4 weeks here, but both in the Wall Street Journal and Bloomberg, kind of egging on this India foreign direct investment narrative. So, if you think about this in the context of like the Minsky credit cycle or the Minsky business cycle, so Minsky believed that these financial bubbles and crashes were just part of capitalism. So he and like Ludwig von Mises would have a lot of disagreement over that, of course. But it's interesting because both of their frameworks are very similar. So Minsky would say first you have some kind of narrative that influences the future outlook of investors, and then you get the credit expansion, which is what fuels the bubble. And so he and Ludwig von Mises would agree with that.
Right. And I would
But
say
Mises would say the credit expansion comes first.
was 100%. Yeah. But I don't, yeah, I think I've noticed a couple of times in observing these cycles that there is a zeitgeist that gets people to do things at the same time that they
Yes.
don't realize. I've seen this twice. I saw it in tech and I saw it actually with microbreweries
Hmm.
that when you're building this little startup company that's private, you don't realize that like 1,000 other people had that exact same time because they recognize the market need. And by the time, so you're all on the same schedule. And by the time you enter the market, takes the exact same amount of time to build a microbrewery. Now, all of a sudden,
Mhm.
there are 1,000 when it really probably only could have supported 100.
Right.
So I do think that there can be something to the just the a business cycle. Now, would it be across industries? That's where I think the credit cycle might come first, but
Mhm. Well, yeah, and that's one thing that like Rothbard wrote in anything that he wrote about the business cycle. It's like you have different industries that go through expansion and default, but
right.
why does it happen to the whole economy at the same
Exactly.
time? That's where you
Yes.
go to the
Yeah,
yeah.
and I will say, I even remember when real estate was regional, and now
Mhm.
real estate rises and falls, like, across the country at once, which was shocking, like, it was clearly a paradigm shift.
Yeah, I think you can thank the market for mortgage-backed securities for that one,
Mm.
but you could do a whole nother show. Did I just say a whole nother? Dang, I know that's not a real word.
Oh, I
Um,
love it. No, definitely. I love that.
um,
Yes, we can definitely do a whole noth like, you can, insert the F word in the middle of any kind of, between syllables, I think is funny too.
oh yeah.
So yes, a
Oh,
whole 'nother show on
yep.
mortgage-backed securities, I would love that.
Okay,
Alright, so go.
sweet. So yeah, so 1993, just kind of the parallel here, was the beginning of the big investment boom in East Asia. So the World Bank put out their magazine, which they used to, I don't think they do anymore, but it was called the East Asian Economic Growth Miracle. And then, magically over the next 4 years, you just had foreign direct investment flood into East Asia, principally Thailand and Malaysia. And so now, so a few years ago, or a few weeks ago, excuse me, beginning of April. Bloomberg Business Week ran an article that was, so the headline was the India growth boom, something like that. And then the sub headline, or the first line in the article, China is slowing and Western governments increasingly see it as a rival rather than an economic partner. On its southwestern border, another rising economy is vying to take its place as the world's next growth driver. So their whole thing is India contributes X amount to total global economic growth right now. And if we keep going at the same trend, then it's going to be responsible for like something like half or more of total global economic growth every year. And then, just another rising economy is vying to take its place as the world's next growth driver. Look, the Indian government operates just like any other government. They're vying to keep their jobs in power. Like that's what they do. And to the extent that their economy grows in spite of everything the government does, that's fantastic. But politicians are not. I just, this media idea that politicians are actually targeting GDP growth, except to the extent that China puts out a growth target of 5% and then somehow manages to magically meet it every single year, even when their banking sector is complete trash. Politicians they're not vying to, they're not vying for GDP growth. It's just stupid to think that way. But anyway, and so in this Business Week article is a nifty little recipe for making India the growth driver that it needs to be. And they talk about getting the recipe just right, and they need to stay on track and follow all of these recommendations. And among them is, well, they're really excited that Narendra Modi is supposed to spend $1.7 trillion on public infrastructure over the next 6 years. And I wrote in my newsletter on this subject, look, the United States was already the global hegemon by the time it dumped the current equivalent of trillions of dollars into its public infrastructure. Roads and bridges are great, but they're not what propels your economy to the top. I'm sorry. Like, there's just not much that's productive about a road that people drive cars on.
So
Right?
but what would be the driver, it seems to me, is a friendly business environment. And it's funny because my son went to Latvia on some school trip not too long ago. And he was saying how people just want to leave, like they want to go someplace where they can make money. And I said, oh,
Mm-hmm.
they probably have like a really restrictive regulatory regime, or a lot of like barriers to entry for
Like
small
you got to
business.
bribe the right people
Yeah,
to
and
start a
he
business. Yeah.
said, he's like, "Yes, that's," like, in an unrelated conversation, somebody told me that. So he
Yeah.
was observing that people wanted to leave, and he also had heard that. So he was kind of blown away, but I'm like, that's the way it is. Like, you hear that from people in Africa too.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah, there's a really good Instagram page that talks about that on Africa. I'll try to find it before we're done so people can follow it. But it's this African entrepreneur who's, oh god, maybe she's from South Africa. But yeah, she's always talking about like, and here's who you have to bribe to start a business, and this is why these countries are poor, and yeah. So anyway, yeah. So among other things, but what's really interesting about the article is it starts with the premise that China is, faltering. China's been the growth story for a couple of decades now, at least. And back in the 80s, it was Japan. And then a lot of investors in the West thought that it was they were looking at East Asia in the mid and late 90s. And China's been the story. China's going to take over the US economically, and they're going to be the superpower and all that stuff. So they start with this premise that China's trajectory is basically faltering. But then this list of recommendations that they make is basically that India needs to just be exactly like China. So they say, well, the problem is there's not enough labor force participation and not enough people live in cities. So we need to cram people into cities. And who needs to spend the money for the people to move to cities? Of course, it's not the corporations, the Western corporations, that are going to invest in productive capacity in India. It's the government that needs to do that, right? Like the government needs to foot the bill.
That's so
So
frustrating.
yeah. So in that, Yeah, so in that newsletter, the theme is always, public expenditures and private profits, like
Yes, and
please
they
make us all this infrastructure.
and I think that the reason they do that is they want to control who becomes wealthy. I mean, that may be a very basic thing to say, but I feel like, there are a lot of competing reasons to do that, just greed and bribing your friends and stuff. But what you really don't want is wealthy people who don't owe it to you. And I also
Mhm.
think, as far as India is concerned, I did like numerous shows on how Rishi Sunak had absolutely no democratic process to become
Mhm.
the PM of England. And that,
It was all backdoor
I mean,
completely.
it was unbelievable, to the point where they made it so only one person qualified to run against him. And then that
And then they
person,
dropped out.
she dropped out. Yeah.
Yeah.
So but I see, like, Nikki Haley and Kamala Harris, like, I heard a hidden audio. There are these Russian pranksters who call bigwigs and pretend
Mhm.
they're somebody else. It's really funny. So they got Lindsey Graham once, and they said that they were, like, Turkish or whatever, and he's like, "Look, the only thing I care about is that you, import this stuff. Like, you have to agree to, like, buy this stuff from us or reduce that, import barrier." It was very, very economic.
Mhm.
So that's why I think, like, they may do the same thing here, shoehorn in a
Mhm.
person with Indian, credentials. So, that would prove to me that this is really, like, the primarily economic controls, the real motive force in the world.
Yeah. Yeah, I would agree. And there's going to be symbolic things like that. So Elon Musk, for example, was scheduled to meet with Narendra Modi a few days ago. And I don't that's really interesting. I don't know if we'll ever find out exactly what happened, but then suddenly the day that he was supposed to visit, he tweeted and said, "My financial obligations to Tesla have made it such that I cannot fulfill my India trip." So there was no meeting with Modi. We'll see if it happens, right? It's supposed to be just postponed. So if it actually happens, maybe in the next couple months, then it'll be like, okay, maybe he was telling the truth. But then what he does is he pivots to China and he shows up in China like yesterday. And so now Tesla stock is soaring because he got some tentative approval for driving software to, have Teslas in China, which the way that the Tesla market operates is just like it's unbelievably stupid that it has a higher valuation than Toyota, but and sells like 5% the amount of cars.
Not as stupid as
um,
Truth Social, though, really.
yeah, no, that one's pretty bad. That one's pretty bad too. Yeah.
I mean, you kind of deserve to, because what they were thinking, I think what people thought they were doing is just donating to Trump, which is what they were doing.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah, definitely. Yep. So there's going to be So there's going to be more. There's going to be more symbolic meetings like that. Musk will show up in India. A bunch more CEOs will show up in India. Um, and it wasn't just Bloomberg Business Week, just in the last few weeks, and that's why I put it in the newsletter and why I wanted to bring it up, because it's just like I just keep seeing it, not only in the big articles, but also just in random corners of the news media. So this is really getting drummed up, and the foreign. So one way to measure the foreign direct investment, which is just when foreigners spend money on, Indian assets. So people from the U.S., they buy Indian stocks and bonds, or there's called portfolio investment, which is where you buy financial assets, and then there's I think it's just direct investment, but that's where you buy land in a factory. So obviously, one type of investment is more stable than the other. In the in the Asia stock bubble, a lot of that foreign direct
foreign direct
investment
investment.
inflow was financial assets. So that makes it a lot easier for that money to escape once
I
it
remember when it
pops.
was illegal in India. They must have changed that.
Yeah. So they've been loosening that. Yeah. So that's kind of the other section to the story. They've definitely been loosening up the capital controls as far as So an American investor cannot buy Indian stocks right now. but there are investment funds that can institutionally buy Indian stocks, and then an American can buy an ETF that has exposure to all of those stocks. So they're gradually, loosening things up, just like, Americans can get exposure to China now too. That hasn't always been a thing. So, in the next phase of this that really made my ears perk up is another outlet that's a lot more industry specific to what I do. Well, they posted an article. Again, this is probably the beginning of April, but it was about how the International Swaps and Derivatives Association. So this is like an industry regulatory body for financial derivatives. And so this article said, well, it was about a white paper that ISDA, that's how people, ISDA, that's how people say. So ISDA put out a white paper full of a bunch more recommendations for what India should do to expand, the breadth of its OTC, which just stands for over-the-counter derivatives market. And in this article and in this white paper, they're saying, well, India has had all this wonderful economic growth and the financial sector is booming, but, their entire OTC derivatives market is only less than 1/100% of GDP. That's the problem they want to solve. Wow.
But don't but the derivative stuff doesn't really help them grow.
I would agree. I would agree. Like
I mean, creating a
India.
secondary market for your financial instruments, yes, will make
Mhm,
your financing go a little more smoothly.
mhm,
But and I actually, I used to be such a libertarian. I'd be like, of course, you should have no restrictions on foreign direct investment or any of that. But the system is so screwed up, and that big money, it has already been curated to the point where it's only people who are totally plugged into the international scene, and
mhm,
they have long-term plans of absorbing. I mean, this happens generally in the third world countries, but they want to absorb all of the surplus wealth and control the style of the government and the system. And I just think of a place like India, and maybe, I mean, it's so vast. Surely they have all the resources they need, that if they
mhm.
just allowed people to work hard. And, I don't know if you need uh, mega size, world global size mega factories. I mean,
Right.
they probably could have any like the basic unit of whatever factories they need to make it efficient is
Mhm.
probably regional in practically every single, whatever thing that they might need. And then the
Yeah.
rest is gravy. But I mean, I'm not suggesting, I don't know enough about it to say that I would put a regulatory regime, but I'm definitely open to the idea of protecting your country from, world corporation.
Yeah, I mean, it's hot money, in the financial realm of that, it's hot money, and hot money doesn't have any friends, it doesn't have any loyalties, and the second anything looks like, there may be high probabilities of defaults, hot money just leaves.
And
Right,
and
that's
sometimes, in a more nefarious sense, they want there to be problems. They will
mhm.
do, because they actually want whatever the underlying collateral was or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah, and a good model for that is you just look at what happened with the, Mexican peso crisis or the tequila crisis back in, 1994, and then there was also an earlier one, I think, in the mid '80s. What happened was a lot of the investment banks had a huge amount of exposure to Latin America, and that exposure was actually enough to completely wipe out their capital base, which would mean the FDIC would have to close them. It was that it, if everything did in fact default, that's how big their exposure was. And so the international community, of course, led by the United States and the
Mhm.
IMF, they got together, and it's really interesting because the central planners, they can always say, well, we didn't actually bail them out because we didn't have to spend any money. What they did was loan guarantees, which allowed Mexico to refinance its debt. What's really happening there is the people who own the Mexican bonds, private and government, and from other places in Latin America. Well, if the IMF and the United States put a loan guarantee, well, the market value of that debt suddenly goes right back up. And so the investment banks can offload it to some other bag holder without taking any losses, and then they can move on to the next thing.
And here's the thing, and also the country cannot buy it back at the cheaper, the bond
Right.
prices, so they can't.
Mhm.
But what G. Edward Griffin said in The Creature from Jekyll Island, he said, "Watch out for their style. So they'll bring you to the brink. They'll
Mhm.
act like they're coming to your rescue, but they always restructure the loan. They never forgive the loan, that you'd
Right.
actually be better off. The whole world would be better off if they just forgave the loans. But the
Mhm.
plot is to keep them forever indebted. And you can see how that would work. I mean, I've been in debt before, and you
Mhm.
just, I've rolled over credit cards, and you just cannot get out from under that because the
Yep.
interest absorbs all your surplus. I mean, if interest is 7%, do you really think that you're making more than 7% surplus on any given investment that or activity you're engaged in? No,
Yeah.
it's really insidious. Debt
Yeah.
is debt is a trap.
Yeah, and that what's crazy too is that loan guarantee that they made to Mexico. I think this was the 80s peso crisis, I want to say. The collateral was all of Mexico's oil supply.
Yeah, I
So
mean,
if
that's
they
the
it
thing.
was
Yeah.
all of Mexico's oil supply.
Yeah.
Like, are you kidding me?
Yeah, that's what they
That's
do, and then they
insane.
own you, and I mean, I even think human capital is part of some of the countries that don't have resources like that, but the countries that have those resources are targeted.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's definitely how it works.
Yeah. So the quote that from the ISDA paper, it advocates for standardization across regulations and international practices to increase harmonization and encourage international participation and investment. This includes allowing full substituted compliance for Indian branches of foreign banks and expanding the list of eligible collateral. So all that means is, hey, follow our rules instead of yours. Like all that's just a bunch of big words that mean we want you to regulate your banks the way that we regulate ours, and you need to play by our rules.
Yeah, I mean, that is, it's a de facto world governance.
Hmm.
Because what they're doing is, and Rosa Quarry used to talk about this, that they want everything to function the same, so it's kind of modular,
Hmm.
so that it's easier to control top down. You don't even
Yeah.
have to know about nuances of specific things.
Yeah. So, yeah, and so the mirror image of foreign direct investment, one good way to look at that is that country's foreign exchange reserves. So, dollars flood into India, dollars and euros and pounds or whatever, flood into India, and then Indians convert them into rupees, or they get the amount of rupees that they want, and then the remainder ends up on banks' balance sheets. Then when the banks have all of the dollars that they want, they turn them into the central bank and say, hey, we want rupees because we're loaned up as far as all the dollar exposure that we want. So please take these. And so that's it's the mirror image of foreign direct investment. Like those excess foreign currencies, they end up with the central bank. And then what does the central bank do with it? They'll either just have them on deposit. They can have them on deposit with the Fed, or they'll turn them into U.S. government bonds. So they'll go and buy treasuries, and that's how that's the logic that leads you to the conclusion that basically the whole financial system is backed by government debt, which is an interesting experiment that's ongoing. But anyway, so their FX reserves in the last 2 years have increased from $390 billion to $550 billion. So that's a 40% increase in only a handful of years. When so the thing to watch as far as the foreign investment boom in India. So I just have a couple points here. When the boom turns to bust, what typically happens is the the external debt of India. So when other countries' financial markets are investing in India, that's creating claims on the Indian economy or the Indian financial system that are owned by institutions outside of India. So think about like global money center banks, JP Morgan and Citi and Barclays and all of the usual suspects, and plenty of others, you know, that I'm sure there's on a smaller scale too, and probably some Japanese banks as well. When the country's external debt rises to the point where it may wipe out the country's foreign currency reserves, when it may wipe out their foreign currency reserve base, that's when shit starts to go haywire. What usually happens is institutions or traders or whoever will start betting against the currency. And so the value of the currency will drop. And then that creates the situation where, oh no, the government may have to liquidate FX reserves in order to protect the currency. And then everybody starts looking at the supply of FX reserves and saying, well, if the rupee starts to go down even more, then it's going to, you know, they're not going to have enough FX reserves to sell to protect the currency. And that just becomes a self-perpetuating cycle. So India is nowhere near that point.
Right, I was going to say,
Right.
you're not suggesting that.
Yeah, no. Could be like if, you know, because every dollar of foreign direct investment, depending on how it's structured, creates a new dollar of those external claims, right? So if it keeps going fast enough, then they may get to that point. They may not. There are other countries that maintain a foreign exchange reserve that is much higher than their external debt. That's one thing about China that they've actually managed to hedge themselves for pretty well. So that may not happen.
Okay.
But what's important about the derivatives market is that, you know, I think this is the warning shot across the bow. This white paper is them telling the world, you know, this is what we're going to do. We are going to start implementing all of these things in India, and they're going to get the help of Western financial institutions, and they're going to get the help of the government. So it's probably going to take 2 or 3 years at least to build that infrastructure out. But once that over-the-counter derivatives market, which again is what is the standardized, administrates, makes contracts for. Once that's there, it's going to enable a lot more sophistication in risk taking. And what I mean is the type of arrangement where you can buy a really, really high risk mortgage-backed security issued by Lehman Brothers, but the institution that's invested in it thinks that they're hedged because they also have a credit default swap on some basket of mortgage-backed securities. So they have an insurance financial derivative on, at least partially, on the thing that they're invested in, and so they feel safe. Or at least moderately safe. Everybody, kind of what I'm getting at is when there's a really expansive OTC derivatives market, you get a situation like the United States has and like the European financial system has, where everybody thinks that they've gotten all of the risk off of their balance sheets, when really they've just stored the risk in all of these different corners that nobody really knows about until it all comes crashing down.
But it would have to so you're not really hedging it.
Yeah.
And
Systemically, it's not hedged. Individually, it's hedged.
Right. Okay. So what's your upshot? Because let's move on to the next topic. But what's your upshot on the India bubble? Like, what is that?
Everybody, well, my upshot is like I'm invested in it, and because India has there really has been a growth miracle in the last 30 years. A lot of their states after independence went to socialism, and a lot of those states have since reversed and have been taking those controls off, a lot like the China story back in the 90s. So there's really a lot of good things about India. It's not a shell game economy, and there's a lot of good productive activity going on there. So in this OTC derivatives market, even though I don't like it from a values perspective, that's going to propel the risk taking that's going to keep sending Indian stocks up, right? So my favorite ETF for India is I think it's called the NFE, but it's an ETF that invests in the Nifty 50 index. It's kind of like our SPY, right? Or our or our QQQ. ETFs. And so already in the last, I want to say the time frame is 5 years on this, but the Nifty 50 index has outperformed, even adjusting for currency risk, it's outperformed the Dow Jones by 15%. So, and that's even after you account for the fact that the rupee has lost a little bit of value against the dollar.
So you see that trend continuing, but you
Oh
are
yeah.
proceeding with caution. You're always alert for big changes,
Yeah,
directional
because
changes.
the time between narrative and bubble burst, and
Mhm,
narrative and there being enough external debt
mhm.
to threaten, a bust is half a decade
Yeah, plenty of warning.
usually. Yeah,
Yeah. Okay, so
you
let
know.
me read this comment by Kelvin, and then we're gonna move on to the next topic.
Mhm.
Kelvin says that the plan is China, Russia, and Israel will rule over the most wealthy part of the coming multipolar order. Any and everything of great significance that is happening is 100% pushing towards this. That is a hot sports opinion, Kelvin. And I'm thinking our friend Ian Davis probably has some revised thoughts on that. So maybe I'll get him back
Yeah.
on to talk about that super big picture. Thank you. And all right. So what's next, Jason?
Yep. Okay, let's see. So somebody asked a question when we posted the episode, if we could talk about whether or not China is investable, or like how bad the situation is. So there's been a couple of signals from that department, and so I'll just give you the punchline. I'm not touching it with a 10-foot pole yet. I think China remains to be seen, and I'm not sure. I think that they very well could be in a secular downtrend in their stock market, similar to what Japan saw after 1990. And if you think about it, there hasn't been a new high in their Shanghai Stock Exchange Index since 2014.
What do you mean by secular, not financial?
So secular is basically long term, and yeah, so you could also say long term. That would be a much easier way to say
Yep,
that,
I understand.
probably. Yeah, it's the difference between, like, if you have a spike in inflation after World War I. That would be a short-term burst of inflation, whereas the inflation that
Right.
was in the 1970s would be
Yeah.
secular, because it was,
Yeah.
the general trend was up and there were
Yes.
waves within the trend.
So are we in having secular inflation now? It's starting to
I
look like it.
I
And I
think
feel
we
like it was
are.
such a result of all that trumped up, pun intended,
Right.
fiscal spending, fiscal stimulus,
Mhm.
that COVID, I think, was actually implemented to stimulate. I mean, that we're not doing that anymore, are we? What's our deficit these days?
Well, the deficit is $1 trillion a year, so we're
All right.
really,
I mean,
really
that's
stepping
back
on
to
the gas.
kind of, yeah, but I mean, yes, it's up from when it wasn't, but
Mhm.
it's down from what caused this huge, like, that filled in the hole of, like, the deflationary debt collapse that
Sure.
was 2008. Uh, but yeah, I think so. I don't know if we want to talk about this, but you were thinking that interest rates were going to back off, and my only counter to that has been that they put in a lot of effort to get those interest rates back up, and
Mhm.
I could never see them going below 5%, and I think 7% would be their target.
Mhm.
But it's backed up. It's that didn't happen. Is that because your buddy Powell is an independent actor, or what? He's certainly not taking orders from Biden.
Yeah, no, of course not. If he were taking orders from Janet
From
Yellen and Joe
Biden,
Biden,
he'd be walking
we
around
would
in
be at
circles.
0.
Oh,
Yeah.
right, yeah, it would be at 0 because it's
Yeah.
an election year, but and my husband's like, "They have to lower rates because it's an election year." I'm like, "That's only if they care about
Oh, yeah.
Biden or Democrats. They don't. It's like whatever the big picture plan is, it's not about party loyalty."
Yeah, the Fed is more likely to, like, the Fed's a political institution, right? But they're more likely to raise rates in an election year just to give the appearance of not being partisan,
Yeah.
to maintain the aura of independence, than they are to cut rates for a particular political candidate. So, yeah, Yeah, so I thought that interest rates were going to be a lot lower now. A lot of that is the fact that, so I was basing that forecast on what would happen if there was a problem in the money market, or if there was a problem in the financial plumbing. Um, because Powell can, I think that Powell's kryptonite is as much as he wants to get. I truly do believe that Powell wants to get inflation back down to 2%. I don't know if that's going to happen because I've also seen 3 or 4 different times now this idea floated of a 3% inflation target instead
Mm,
of a 2. So
what do you
that's
think
been
about
in.
that?
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, yeah. So, I mean, even a long-term House of Representatives veteran, something Sherman from Southern California, he posed that in one of Powell's hearings, and then I saw it in the Bloomberg opinion, and then I saw it somewhere else, and it's just like, oh, yep, there it is. There's the seeding the ground to up the target. Um, but anyway, I think that that's truly his goal. But he has people on his board who do not care if inflation actually goes down to 2%. Right now, they probably think that the economy, that rates are too tight and they need to come down just to keep unemployment low where it is. Um, but Pal's kryptonite is if there's a problem in the repo market, right? Like September 2019, if there's a problem in this short term money market where all of the investment banks go to fund their purchases of corporate and government securities, that's going to change the Fed's behavior 100%. Um, I truly believe that because that's like a August 2007 type of event that they just never want to see again.
Right.
So I was thinking that the runoff. So what the Fed's doing right now is they bought, I think $7 trillion worth of securities in total. I think 5 of that was treasuries and 2 of it was mortgage backed. Um, Forgive me if any of those numbers are too approximate, but right now they're letting the balance sheet run off. So they're selling all of those assets, and that's decreasing the amount of cash assets in the banking system. And I was under the impression that that would have an effect a lot sooner than it seems to have. Right. So even with that balance sheet runoff, the banks seem to be, the securities markets seem to be functioning well. The money market seems to be functioning well. All indicators of risk in both the bond market and the money market are very low.
All right.
And I sent out in my last newsletter, I think it was in Thursday or Friday, I shared some of those metrics.
How can people
So
sign up for that?
yeah, just go to jpurcell.me/newsletter. And there's a sign up form there. So yeah, that was my big thing, and then and also I thought that because China was having a little bit of a repo crisis, like an August 2019 type of or a September 2019 type of event that was happening for them back in October, and so I overestimated how big of a spillover that would have.
Okay.
I'm not convinced that the drawdown in the Fed's balance sheet is not going to have that effect. I'm going to send out a newsletter that kind of has the levels to look out for now that I'm a little bit more educated on the subject. But yeah,
Okay.
that's why I was wrong.
All right. So, well, I wasn't like saying you were wrong. You just
Oh, I
have
was wrong,
to,
so it's fine.
yeah. But you just, I mean, these things like there's just a lot of moving parts, and I just wanted to understand which one was different. So the China, so I definitely want to get to the Chase CBDC infrastructure.
Oh yeah, yeah. I just have
So finish
just
the
two
China
points
thing
about
if you don't
China, and
mind,
we're good.
and also
Yep.
if there's anything else you pulled off of Twitter, we can
hmm
get to those questions.
Cool. Yeah. So the deal with so the two signals out of China are um so the yuan so the yuan, or I think it's actually pronounced the yuan, but anyway, is
Yeah.
struggling to stay off of it's struggling to stay, which is the same pronunciation as the South Korean currency, which kind of makes sense. Um, so the yuan is struggling to stay off of its 17-year low of about 13.69 cents or 13.69 cents. It's now hovering around 13.82. This is a low not seen since 2007 when China allowed their currency to appreciate significantly. Um, by something like, I think the currency in a couple years between 2006 and 2008, 2009 went up. I mean, a quarter, maybe 25%. So this is the lowest level we've seen since then. Then so the Chinese Treasury Department came out and said that they support the People's Bank of China doing a treasury investment program. So when China's financial situation is in really bad shape, they don't do quantitative easing like we do. So quantitative easing is the Fed goes out and buys 10-year treasuries and just leaves them on the balance sheet until the economy looks good. China doesn't do that with their
That's how
central
they
bank.
get cash into the system, right?
Yeah.
Easy
That's how
money, and
they.
then people can borrow it, and okay.
Yep. Yeah. So the banks have plenty of cash flow for settlement and all that kind of stuff. So what China does is, and I think it has to do with interest rate risk. And honestly, I think that this is a little bit smarter approach. But what China does is two things. One, they designate a particular industry that the central bank will accept collateral for. So imagine that a private bank in China like HSBC buys a bunch of bonds by a real estate developer. Well, then the PBOC will say, I will lend to HSBC using those real estate bonds as collateral. So they do that. And then they'll also issue credit to the private banks on collateral of Chinese government bonds. And then the other thing they'll do is they'll hold government bonds on their balance sheet for, a limited time. They'll basically act as a dealer. So a dealer is kind of like a warehouse. Think about like beer distribution. They buy beer from the breweries and then they keep it in the warehouse for a little bit, but it's all with the intent to sell in not too much time. So the PBOC will do that in the bond market. And that's sending a signal that to me, I think that means that the Chinese government is about to embark on a big stimulus spree because they're well aware that their economy is in the toilet and they need to. And that piece of it is telling all of the private investment community, hey, please buy Chinese bonds, because if you get in a bind, the PBOC will buy your government bonds. If for whatever reason you need to get rid of them. So they're telling the investment community, there's no risk here. Please fund the stimulus that we're about to do. And then the other thing is their banks are levering up again. Their banks are investing in real estate, and because they've been told by the government, so after a big real estate default crisis, the government told them to invest in real estate assets. And the government also said invest in infrastructure, manufacturing assets.
Yeah, so they're trying to fill in a deflationary debt collapse.
Yeah.
Basically, or no?
Yeah,
I mean,
no,
that's what that is.
exactly. Yeah. Exactly, yes. And I don't honestly know how that pans out. China's in uncharted territory because they have such direct control over the banks and they can tell the banks to do whatever the government wants. And there's just no playbook for what that looks like, other than maybe the Soviet Union, where all the institutions just have to do what the government says. And so the Soviet Union, their economy looked like a straight line, but it was all building up to this mass, it was just waiting for a straw to break the camel's back. And I don't know. I just see China as the same way, because anytime they get into a bind, the government can just say, hey, please lend more, everybody. And then they lend more, and then it just keeps going. So, so I don't. And then the other thing with China is I think we're very, very close to capital controls where Americans may not. And the Biden administration has already floated this. It was in Bloomberg sometime last year. So Americans may be in a situation in the next few years where they have investments in China and can't even redeem them because of our regulations.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, that kind of risk used to be like the standard for foreign investment. That's why it would make me crazy when people like Trump and others would say, we need to go into the Middle Eastern countries and seize their oil to whatever. Like, for some reason he had um, compensate oil companies for being over there. And my argument is always, if oil companies are going into foreign countries, that's the risk they are taking. The U.S. Army is not responsible for securing their investment at our
Yeah.
expense. I mean, yeah, again, government in and profits, private out.
Yep.
Okay,
Yeah,
so
exactly.
keep going.
CBDC?
Yes, let's do it. Yeah.
Okay. I'm trying to separate these. Open in new window. Move tab to new window. There we go. Okay. All right. So JP Morgan, just punchline, JP Morgan Chase, I believe, is embarking on the private infrastructure to enable maybe not a CBDC, but the kind of functions, the privacy violations and the data sharing that people are most concerned about when it comes to a CBDC. So if you want, I do have a 2-minute, 30-second clip of Christine Lagarde when she was chairwoman of the IMF back in 2018, talking about her vision for how a CBDC world would work. We can look at that, or I can
Yeah.
just kind of.
No,
Okay.
that'd be cool.
All right. So share.
Hopefully that works. It should work.
Hopefully.
Well, I've never been on the other side of StreamYard trying to do a clip or share the screen as a guest.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. Hey, there it is. Yeah, great.
Sweet.
Is this fine?
Yeah, that's
Okay.
good.
Are we not hearing it? We're supposed to be hearing it? Jason, speak to me. Are we supposed to be hearing this?
Yeah. Do you not hear it?
I do not hear it.
Oh, okay. That's weird.
That is weird. Let me see. Sorry. Oh, it's gone now. You took it down.
Sorry, let me get it back up.
And if you just send me the link in the chat here, if you can do that.
To share audio, tab
Yes.
A. Also share audio.
I mean, I bet
It's,
if we duck out, try it again, and I think I can probably hack it. Just try it again, and my guess is if I pull us out, it'll work.
Okay, here we go.
So do that.
Paper, really interesting. And I believe that we should consider the possibility
Hear it now?
to issue digital
Yes.
currency.
Okay.
There is a role for the state to supply money to the digital economy. To satisfy public policy goals that you are familiar with, such as inclusion, security and consumer protection, to provide what the private sector cannot provide, and also privacy in payment. Let me touch on the third benefit now of digital currency, and I would like to highlight the privacy domain. Cash, of course, allows for anonymous payments. We reach for cash to protect our privacy, our identity for legitimate reasons, to avoid exposure to hacking and customer profiling, for instance. Let's take just an example. Imagine yourself purchasing, frozen pizza and beer. Ooh. Now, surprisingly, consumers of frozen pizzas and beer, in my example, are associated with higher mortgage default than those who actually consume organic broccoli and exquisite wine.
I don't like where this is going.
What can you do if you're really craving for pizza and beer and yet you do not want your credit score to drop? You're not going to go for broccoli. You will pull out cash. And tomorrow, would a privately owned payment system push you to the broccoli side? Would central banks jump to the rescue and offer a fully anonymous digital currency? Certainly not, because that would be a bonanza, not for broccolis, but for criminals. And that brings me to my third area. I'll come back to the
It's
pizza
always
later.
criminals, right?
Potential downsides of digital currency. The obvious ones are risks to financial integrity and financial stability. But I would also like to highlight risks to stifling innovation, risk of stifling innovation, which is obviously the last thing that we want.
Ugh.
Yeah. So
Just her
the
contempt of people who eat effing frozen pizza and beer. I have some very good frozen pizza in my. I don't drink beer because I'm celiac, but she's just such a fucking c word.
yeah, I know. It's
I mean, what a just ugh.
yeah,
And what
it's so
she's
bad.
protecting us against. So the low class trash who defaults on their mortgage and sits around eating frozen pizza and drinking beer, which she should respect with an accent like that.
Yep. Agreed.
So, but what was her point? Like that you need to that your credit score would go down if you were getting pizza and beer, so you have to take cash out, or that you didn't want to put money on, you didn't want to use your credit card because you were already on the edge. Like, is that what her point was?
Oh my
Was it about
gosh.
control or what?
Yeah. So her point on the whole thing is the private digital currency system threatens to drop your credit score if you buy pizza and beer. So, as an alternative, what's under her control, the central bank digital currency, are we going to allow you to anonymously buy pizza and beer with your central bank digital currency? And
Right.
what's really crazy is that her punchline is, well, no, we can't do that because it's going to be a bonanza for criminals. So what
Which
she's
she
saying,
did not, like, fill in the, the actual gap there, but also, I'm
yeah,
just trying to understand, is she assuming that there's penalties for making poor consumer choices?
yeah, yeah.
That
So
is
the
so
assumption is your credit score
nuts,
drops if you buy frozen pizza and beer. Yeah,
instead of
mhm.
broccoli,
Instead of
which,
broccoli
by
and
the way,
exquisite wine.
broccoli is absolutely full of toxins. I'm sorry to say that, but I mean, you can look into it, and I'm not
Hmm.
saying not to eat it. I love broccoli,
Hmm.
but there
Me
is some
too.
stuff about those cruciferous vegetables, stuff that
Hmm.
grows above ground that has some toxins in it. So this is the problem. Like Bloomberg, I knew as soon as Obamacare came down, they would use it as an excuse to control what you consume.
Yep.
And Bloomberg, I said it in advance, and Bloomberg actually identified Obamacare for why he gets to tell us what to put in our bodies. So he wanted to limit or ban sugary drinks in New York. And I'm
Hmm.
thinking, do you know what people drink instead of sugar? I mean, corn syrup is a substitute for sugar, and it's so like
Hmm.
one of the two worst things you can do next to seed oil. But
Yeah.
then you've got stevia, which apparently creates reproductive issues
Infertility.
in females. Yup. Good one. Not too many people know that. Saccharin, which some people say cause cancer. NutraSweet, which is the number one, 95% of all complaints to the FDA are about headaches caused by NutraSweet.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Oh,
Wow.
yeah. Donald
Hmm.
Rumsfeld pushed that through when he was head of Monsanto, if I'm not mistaken.
Donald
Uh,
Rumsfeld is the devil.
Oh,
Was
he
the
is the
devil.
devil. Like, it's hilarious. When he died, like, my
Yeah.
son and I were just like,
I
"Boy,
celebrated. Yeah.
wanna
I had
be
a
a
beer.
fly on the wall of that conversation." Like,
Hmm.
"Wait, I thought we were friends. Like, why are you putting me on
Yep.
this? I thought I was gonna get to sit with you, Satan." Um, anyway, so this idea that they're going to systemically tell us these people who are in bed with big pharma is
Hmm.
not into nutritional solutions to health problems. So
Right.
you cannot, I mean, the fact that that was an underlying assumption that she did, I mean, maybe it was in the video before, but I've heard it before, and it seems like it's just an assumption. And she's going
Yeah.
to like what problems arise from this assumption, which is
Hmm.
nuts.
Yeah, and you got to think about why is an assumption too, because she's been in this arena for decades. This so
Yeah.
Lagarde is now the chairwoman of the ECB, the European
Yeah.
Central Bank. She was
Wow. Yeah.
chairwoman of the IMF.
Yeah.
So in the IMF, both organizations are, they're in partnership with all of their member banks. The IMF does business with, the larger banks in the United States and across the world, and the same thing is true about European Central Bank with, their bigger banks in Europe.
Well,
So
the
the
IMF is responsible for getting countries indebted in order to get at their collateral. They were big with Kerry and Biden in Ukraine, by the way.
Oh yeah, okay. I need to do a little bit. Yeah, I
Yeah,
need to do a little bit.
IMF is bad.
Yeah.
I know you know that, but okay, yeah, keep going.
Yeah. So so thought experiment is, would you rather have a CBDC that's an outright CBDC, or would you rather have a private digital currency that does all of the stuff that you are concerned that a government CBDC would do? So on it, and so context, on April 3rd, I think it was in the Wall Street Journal. But Chase Bank is going to start selling. They're getting into the advertising business, so they're letting advertisers target customers based on spending data. And so, if you think about the different things that need to happen in order for Christine Lagarde's wet dream to come true, where people are getting credit scored based on what they purchased at the bodega in the middle of the night,
No wonder
there's a
those are the
couple.
people who are defaulting. They're the people she's
Right?
targeting.
Yeah.
She's targeting for you for being a frozen pizza eater
Hmm.
and drinking beer. She's targeting you for that
Hmm.
financially, and then saying that those are I wonder if that's a real stat. Fucking frozen pizza eaters and beer are more.
I think it was hypothetical for her, but I don't know.
Yeah,
I
I
mean,
mean, I
it
wouldn't be
sounded like it was just
surprised. I mean,
hypothetical.
obviously, cheap food and people who don't have a lot of money have to go
Hmm.
together, but,
Yeah.
I still hate her.
Yep. Oh, me too. Me too.
Uh,
Yeah. So there's a couple of pieces of infrastructure that have to be deployed in order to make that a reality. And I think what Chase is doing is, so affiliate marketing has been around for years, but the way that it has worked in the past, and still currently works, is whenever you get a link from the advertiser, or yeah, whenever you get a link from whoever the affiliate is, you have to put in that coupon code or that link, and that's the only way that the seller knows that you got there from a particular source. What JP Morgan Chase is doing now is they're going to directly have the spending data in the app, and what happens is you activate a deal that's from an advertiser, say like 1% off purchases at Cheesecake Factory or some shit. And so when that deal is active, that data is transmitted directly when you make the expenditure, and then the advertiser is paying based on that. So, verified spending, but which is nothing crazy, right? Like, this is marketing 101. It's been here
mhm,
since the internet age and in different forms. But what's interesting about it is that this is all is that the transmission of data is all happening within the bank rather than uh, between an internet exchange between an advertiser and the vendor, right?
mhm.
And so this is,
Interesting data.
yeah. So this is not enough. This is not enough data to create the world that Lagarde is talking about,
Right.
where the credit rating agency can know what you bought at the gas station. But it's one more step to where all of the data can be mined just from the bank itself,
Yeah,
and then the
isn't that
bank
the
can
essence
transmit it.
of the blockchain? But it's
It's
completely like, it has a history in it, like, people, like, tout it as being the most anonymous thing, but
oh
actually,
yeah,
it
yeah, yeah.
seems to me like the neat like, when I take a $20 bill out of my,
Mhm.
wallet, there's absolutely no way to know where it's been and what
Right.
it's bought.
Well, and since you brought that up, Japan put out another, because they've been in process of developing a CBDC for a couple years now. So the Bank of Japan put out a paper yesterday about their one of their beta tests for a CBDC, and interestingly enough, they intend to use it on the Ethereum blockchain. So
Mm.
so much for blockchain technology being a bastion of privacy
Yes,
in the
right.
financial world, right?
Yes, and limited and according to rules. Although I don't even think ETH is limited and according to rules the way
No,
Bitcoin
yeah,
is.
yeah. Bitcoiners will tell you that, and I don't know enough about that aspect, but Bitcoiners will tell you that that the Ethereum Foundation is compromised because I think they have people in the, or the people in the WEF have people in the Ethereum Foundation and whatnot. But yeah, so they intend to use and that may have been what ETH was developed for, was to be the CBDC blockchain. I don't know. But yeah,
Oh
so
yeah,
that's,
maybe.
yeah,
Yeah,
so.
because it wouldn't be Bitcoin because Bitcoin is limited.
Mhm.
So it really can't be Bitcoin.
Yeah.
Uh okay, so
Yeah. So the next step in this process would be the linkage between product codes and spending, or the linkage between a receipt from an establishment and the spending. Because in order to, you could have stores that, I could see penalties for like buying something at a gun store or buying too much stuff from a meat shop or something. Um, for carbon credit purposes and things like that. But to really make that kind of to really make that kind of world a reality, you would need to have the actual purchase receipts in some way mined out by the bank and then attached to the purchase. Like you spent $100 at 7-Eleven, but you could have been buying a bunch of bags of chips, or you could have been buying coffee for all of your, you don't know what's in that receipt. So the next step in that process would be some kind of connection between the spending data that goes to the bank, which right now all they know is the establishment that you spent money at, and the actual itemized record of what you bought. So that's something that that as this goes on, my eyes are kind of peeled for.
okay. So I am going through here to identify some comments I would like to read. Do you have
Okay.
anything from Twitter that you've identified? Because I don't want to, some people did give us answers on Twitter. Did you
Oh yeah,
observe
yeah.
those? And
Yeah.
we
So
hit that, right?
yeah, so one of our followers
Tweets.
asked about the suppression of the silver market. I think that well, for me personally, it's definitely a buy. The gold silver ratio is at an all-time low. I think that the reason that I don't think that the silver market is manipulated to a great extent, and I personally, given the research that I've done, I don't think that any market can be manipulated for the long term. And I only say that because the Fed tried in the late 60s, before they got off the gold standard. They sold short the Deutschmark so that it wouldn't
Mhm.
weaken as much, or so that the dollar wouldn't weaken as much against it. And they completely failed. So I think market
Yeah.
manipulation can work in the short term, can marginally push a price down for a while, but I don't think that it works in the long term. So I don't think that silver is suppressed, and I do think that it's a buy right now because I
Okay,
believe
great.
that my view is that the price is low right now because of forecasted lower industrial demand. Because it is an industrial commodity, it goes into all kinds
Yes.
of things. But
Mhm.
once you get out of, once that macroeconomic story kind of gets out of it and the business cycle turns around, then that's not going to be a factor anymore, and so it'll catch up. So,
Okay, excellent.
but yeah,
All right,
what
I
else
have
we
some
have?
comments here. All right, just some comments and some. I think there's a couple of questions. Abundance Protocol says he is joining us live while trading Nasdaq futures. Right on.
Cool.
Joe, not a Fed. How does the American debt held by China affect future scenarios?
How does the amount of American debt by China affect future scenarios? Well, if they have a gun, but it's pointed at their foot. So
Okay,
if
that's great. That is such a great. I
so
was like, that's going to be a complicated question, but yes,
yeah,
I get it. Like it's a problem for them. as much
Yeah.
as it's a problem for us.
Well, yeah, so their FX reserves, it's even more of a problem for them because our financial system is capitalized by the United States government debt. Like we have like our bank is the Fed and their base of assets is US government debt. And so if we ever need any more of those assets, we can literally just print more. And that has limits. I'm not saying you just, do this fiat bullshit thing forever. On the long run, we are on a very interesting human experiment, and I don't know how it ends, and I think it ends in a
I never
really
know either.
interesting, fun way. Um, but what China has is if they wanted to use that pistol that they have in their hand and try to point it at us, it's going to go through their own foot first, because if they do anything to tank the value of that stock of government debt, and you can go back to the relationship in 2009, like what they were saying about quantitative easing, it's really interesting. They care more about what the value of that government debt is more than anything else. Because if they, tried to engineer a sell-off where the value of US government bonds falls by 50% on average, well, then their FX reserves just got cut in half by 50%. That's not going to look good for them. Like that would be like a bank that would be like a bank holding a bunch of bonds issued from Lehman Brothers, and then Moody's, tanks the credit rating of Lehman Brothers, and all those bonds go to shit. It's the same dynamic. So yeah, it's a gun, but it's pointed at them,
Right.
and then maybe the US is standing on the other side of their foot.
Okay. Fair enough. To your point about guessing the ending, I never can. Angus says he thinks Trump is going to get back in so they can keep the chaos going. I actually thought that's why he was going to win in 2020, but you never know. I mean, people do think that, and I'm usually wrong on guessing who is going to win an election. I don't know why. I always get it wrong. It's kind of like I'm terrible at directions. I feel like my instincts are so bad that I do the opposite of my instincts, and then I'm wrong.
I
I don't
identify
know.
with that 100%.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I just
Yep.
get it a little bit wrong sometimes.
Yep.
Okay, Joe says people have gotten used to interest rates again, which is not the same as liking it. What gets their attention is inflation. Yeah, that's pretty annoying. I will tell you that.
Yep.
Okay, so he's saying that they're probably going to keep interest rates up if given a choice. If
Oh yeah.
if even for political reasons. Okay.
Yeah, we're never going back to zero. I mean, even the Fed would consider 2.5% or 2% stimulative. I think if in the next downturn they will probably get between 2 and 3. But their view is that 2.5 is neutral, and so if they can get 0.5% below neutral, they're not going to, that's what they're going to do. And they'll buy as many bonds as they have to. Like they can do that and then buy $2 trillion of treasuries again, whatever. Everything's on the table, but I don't think they're going to go back to zero.
Yes. Okay. I want people to know to get your newsletter is jpurcell.me/newsletter. Right?
Yep. Perfect.
Okay. Angus, the push to CBDC started when they put everyone's paycheck into direct deposit.
I thought that was a long time ago.
Maybe he's saying they were thinking ahead. Yeah, the direct deposit thing is pretty bad. Joe says they want to force you what to buy. That's how we end up eating bugs. Yeah.
Well, it's kind of hard to look at Lagarde's. It's kind of hard to look at her mental worldview, like her list of assumptions, like you said.
Yeah.
It's the assumption that's in her mind that makes that speech so interesting. Like she just assumes that this is how shit's going to be. Pretty confidently.
And it's an interesting point because as you see like the electric vehicle thing pull back a little bit, solar pull back, the fact that that's happening at the same time and still they took the Bolivian guy out to because he was going to build a lithium factory and they just wanted his lithium. I mean, I can't reconcile all of those things, but it seems like because it's happening at the same time, it might be part of the plan. But on the other hand, it might be just they just could not get us there right now, which is our only hope.
I don't know if
Did you get
good?
frozen? Yeah. Okay. Calvin says rapeseed is added to most butters and margarines. Wow. I am
Butters.
really going to look heavily at my butter now. I started buying this freaking delicious French butter. It's incredibly expensive,
Hmm.
but I do like grass fed Kerrygold, but I'll have to check the ingredients, assuming that it's accurate.
I'll have
Uh,
to look at mine too.
Joe says, I'll take the honest criminals every time. When I lived in Ukraine, nobody went to government. They would almost universally choose the mob. They were less corrupt. That I'm
I like it.
sure is true about Ukraine.
Yeah. At least the mob has a code, right?
Yeah. And they probably have, some level of accountability, at least. I mean, at least from the other families who are competing for the corners, although I think that that's probably a very passe view of the mob. I think that's long gone. Joe, they have already been doing this tracking with gun purchases. Banks and credit cards have been narking directly to the feds, and Visa and MasterCard have added a secret code to their receipts to ID gun purchases.
Yeah, I think what another step that the government could take, or one of the regulatory bodies, it could be the FDIC or the Treasury Department could just say, we would like you to enforce a penalty on credit card transactions for certain types of stores. That's if you go back
Yeah.
to like Lincoln in
Oh.
1863, that's how they got rid of state banknotes. They just put a 10% tax on them and bye-bye, no more state
I've
money.
been thinking for a long time that it'll actually be progressive. So you can have one frozen pizza a month, but you can't have two, like the
Yeah.
100% tax, like the tax rate will go up. Squidgy Nuisance, Squidgy Nuisance to AI says that it's all brainwashing. Don't fall for it. I think he's talking about crypto. I mean, whether it's brainwash, I
Thought he
definitely.
was talking about me. Shit, okay.
No, no. You are clean, but it's not brainwashing. It's just you give us the straight truth or your view of it, which is really all we can ask for. And Angus says, "Great show as always, Monica." Thank you, Angus. Thank you, Jason. Is there
Monica
anything you
is a
want to
great
tell
show.
the folks? Do you want to tell anybody anything? Where to find you and all of that?
Oh yeah, so Instagram is Purcell Research, and Twitter is Jason's Deli 1821. No punctuation, no caps.
Nice. All right,
And
that's
yeah,
awesome. Yeah.
be
So,
careful out there.
until next time, people, thank you so much for popping in. It's
Thanks for
always a
having me.
pleasure, and I really appreciate that you took some time out from work. Thank you, Jason Purcell. Bye,
Thank
everybody.
you. Bye, everybody.